What the heck are you doing? I want my kids to have a good education. Oh, what are you doing? Do you guys even know what you're doing? This is brutal. This is brutal. How are you gonna get my kid ready for university? Huh? Oh, this is not how I was taught. Why is my kid getting to pick their own mark? Explain to me that. Like, are you guys even doing the content? Where's the content? My kid needs to know the content. Like, I don't get it. Like, there's nothing going on here. Like, what are these guys even doing? Hi, my name is Tony Clark. I'm a teacher in Niverville High School, and you're watching this video probably because you are concerned about the education of the community and of kids, and that means we're on the same team. Same team. So I want to talk to you about what the heck is happening in Niverville High School, and this is a successful video if you actually come out and have a chat with us. We're actually trying to increase the discourse and the discussion about what is a good education. And just as a preemptive to that, I want to show you that there's 3 considerations when we're thinking about what a good education is and how to talk about it. Is this really necessary? Is this really necessary? There's nothing wrong with the old one. Let's just keep it the same way. So first of all, you need to understand that education is a historical concept. It's something that was constructed over 125 years. And back, during the war times, Prussia, there was a factory model that was established in order to train up a society that could follow instructions, could go from factory to militia and back again. And they knew the information they needed, and they could perform the task that was required. Not a lot of independent thinking, and this was a time where content was actually hard to get. So we had an expert who would come in and stand in the front of the classroom and would deliver that information. Yeah, and then the world changed. Then all of a sudden we had DNA and we had mass media. All of a sudden we had, transportation where the whole planet just kind of shrunk. And then in the mid-90s, we had the internet. And that categorically changed the world. Emphatically changed. Drastically changed. See, the world back then was very much based on information was hard to get. Content was hard to get. So we had experts. And the public school system was invented to get a standardized approach to getting those experts in front of our kids, the next generation, and giving them the information they would need. So after the internet, all of a sudden information was free, information was fast, and it was at your fingertips. Never before had a kid, let's say a young kid in the basement of a small town called Niverville, had the same power that really only an emperor or a king would have. At a touch of a finger, 1 million people or more would be influenced and impacted by something that one person said. And that completely changed the world. Now information was easy to get. Now information was literally at your fingertips in an instant. The whole of human existence and understanding and learning available. The president and a primary school student could get the same information just as quickly. It's a new world. We have about 15,500 schools in Canada, and one of the main skills that we're teaching in the majority of those classrooms is memorization. How is that right? When we can literally have access to any information that we need in a second, in a millisecond, and one of the main skills we're still learning is memorization. Memorization can't be what we're training the next generation into. That can't be all of it. The old way of doing things, down the dirt road, is where we've come from, and that is a transmissive culture, where you've got an expert or a sage on the stage, and they tell everybody how the world works, and they know everything. And that was the case. They did know a lot, but it's becoming increasingly irrelevant. And again, I quote, "It's irrelevant to a world in which disciplinary knowledge has a very limited shelf life." Right? The way things work is continually being reinvented. Young people experience formal training and learning and work at the same time. They learn on the job. See, our historical understanding of learning and how learning works is actually based on a rat in a maze. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with those experiments, but many, many moons ago, they would put a rat in a maze and they would have that rat look for a piece of cheese. And then we would study how learning works. So if you can imagine now that rat is actually in a modern day maze, and that maze, all the walls are on wheels. So the walls are continually moving. On top of that, the cheese is moving. And on top of that, there's lots of other rats in the maze, and there's tons of distractions around every corner. And that is a picture of our workplace today. Everything's changing, there's way more competition, and you need to be able to adapt. Leadbeater, another quote, "With all of our scientific and technological advancement, we have never been more ignorant. We have less intimate knowledge of the tech we use every day, and we will continue to experience a growing gap between what we know and the knowledge that is embedded in our manufactured environment. We are more ignorant than our predecessors." But that's the thing. We actually need to know how to put that ignorance to work. We actually need to value our ignorance and use the fact that we don't know stuff to help us solve problems. Knowledge is not fixed. It's not a hidden gem in the pocket of a teacher where you do the right things and then you get that gem handed to you and now you have the gem, and it's just this thing that we could package up and give to each other. One concern that I hear a lot is that we're not going to cover all the content in the curriculum. And I would like you to question some of the assumptions about curriculum in that concern. The assumption is that a teacher teaches the whole curriculum every year and he doesn't miss a thing. That her teaching of that curriculum is exactly the same as another social studies or math or an English teacher in another school or across Winnipeg or across Manitoba or across Canada. And it's not true. Ask any teacher if they teach the whole curriculum, they'll say, "Well, I try." If you think curriculum is this gospel truth that will naturally bring your child success, here's a question. It was only a few years ago I could not show you a social studies classroom that taught about residential schools. So we need to stop thinking about curriculum as this fixed thing that every teacher hits and does perfectly and every kid gets like it's some kind of prepackaged material. Better to think we're going to cover the curriculum, and more importantly, we're going to give the kids skills so that if there is anything else that they need in life, they know how to get it, they know how to think critically about it, and they can apply it. So times have changed, and we need to get together as a community and discuss how our kids should grow. We want them to be competent, we want them to be content in their adult lives. And the way history's done it doesn't mean that's the way we need to do it. So my second point that we should consider as we're talking about how to discuss what is a good education is that a good education is actually framed a lot around what we're familiar with, and we don't like what we're unfamiliar with. How are my kids going to be ready for the future? Are they learning enough? Are they going to be ready for university? Do you guys even know what you're doing? Those are all legitimate concerns, and we want to have those conversations. But it is important to notice how much of this is based on familiarity. We're very familiar with stand and deliver teaching. right? You probably grew up with it, I grew up with it, and it's familiar. And so at Niverville High, you're going to hear other words like project-based learning, student inquiry, you're going to hear things like 6 C's, outcome-based assessment, deeper learning, interdisciplinary learning. So all those might be unfamiliar. And especially when you hear, oh, my kid's giving himself his own mark, and some of those assumptions that they need some explaining. These are all really exciting components of something that's spreading over the whole globe. It's happening in all parts of different countries as people recognize that the way we've been doing it doesn't line up with the way the world is right now. So project-based learning is really a model where students learn the content through projects that are usually student-led, student-initiated. And it's very different than a teacher lecture-based style where kids just receive and it's very passive. It's very active, and the fact is that you might walk away from a lecture and feel like you learned something, but research has actually proven that feeling like you learned something does not correlate to actually learning something. Just ask what the sermon was about Sunday at lunch, right? So project-based learning has actually been proven to increase engagement in learning. Increased engagement, increased activity, that means that stuff gets retained. When kids' hearts are activated, they care about what they're doing and they're motivated to learn. They're activated because they're tackling real world problems, right? We're not talking about Johnny and Susie on a train going certain kilometers an hour. Project-based learning has to do with real world problems and how to tackle those and come up with real student solutions. And as they're doing those projects, they are doing the content, plus they're working on real world skills. We call them 21st century skills. In Hanover, we call them the 6 C's. And these are the things that, whether you notice it or not, you use in the adult workplace. Things like collaborating with people that you don't really like. Or maybe you do and you don't really get much done. Collaborating to make meaning. Being creative and thinking outside the box and coming up with new ideas and innovations. Character as a learner, that grit and that tenacity to actually get something done when it might be uncertain in the future, where it might be difficult, where you experience failure. Character as a learner is one of those C's. Another one is citizenship and exercising good citizenship. Project-based learning makes a lot more room for tech and for software, and as the kids go in their separate directions to create their projects, they often turn to a type of tech or a resource that maybe other kids in the room aren't. And so there's just more variation and more variety as they dive deep into what they need to accomplish their goals and get their project made. Often that involves talking to an expert in that field. These are all opportunities that tend to not creep up when you're doing worksheets and reading a textbook, because all the information is there, packaged and prepared for you, and usually outdated. Project-based learning also allows teachers to work more closely with their students. So on top of the student being engaged, this allows for more meaningful interactions with the teacher, more as a coach, more as a kind of a meddler, like, okay, why are you reading that? Why? So they kind of meddle in there, rather than the teacher being an expert and just divulging all this information only to have it barfed back by the student. Now the student is the expert. The student is the one who's creating the knowledge, and the teacher coaches them into deeper levels. Also, one of the things I love the most about project-based learning is that it creates agency. It creates a voice. So for those kids who might be struggling with school, all of a sudden now they are researching and inquiring into something. They are building something that is going to have an impact on the world. All of a sudden their voice has power and they have agency. And that kind of experience in school can flip somebody's life right around. My final point is that a good education is actually a social construct that's based on our values. And we need to come together and be really honest about what we value. If I'm saying that Niverville High's model of education is good and others are not as good, that's a value statement. And we might have very different values. we really need to just talk about why we value what we do and be honest about it. So Lipnovich and Smith were these two researchers, and they wanted to figure out the effect of feedback on students. And so they actually took 3 groups and they assessed them throughout the semester. One group got just number marks. Another group got number marks and written feedback. And a third group got no number marks, just written feedback. So I think you know where I'm going with this. Which group performed best at the end of the semester? Which group actually knew their stuff better at the end of the semester? Pause for effect. The group that only got written feedback. It has been proven that numbers and marks actually stop the learning. Think about it. When you got a 15%, well, that's the best I can do. I don't know this crap. Or if you got a really high mark, I totally know this stuff. There's nothing else for me to learn, which is totally false. Now, no one is getting rid of marks at NHS. It's just that we don't value numerical feedback as much as growth mindset and the continuation of learning. So that's a value statement. And you're not going to hear as much about marks. We're always going to point to the learning. Oh, Tony, but that's not the way I was taught. Okay, fair enough. Think about that for a second. We all come to a discussion like this with something called educational biographies. You went to school, I went to school, we know what school's all about. We know what works. Ironically though, many parents would say that they weren't prepared for university. They weren't prepared for their career. And we should do something different. We should make a change. You went to school and you've got a certain level of experience. But if I look at that forklift and I say, hey, I've got a certain level of experience, I can dig with a shovel. I've driven down this highway for 20 years, right? I know how construction works. I've used a shovel before. I know what's going on here, right? They didn't need to fix this highway. It was fine the way it was. It was a little bumpy. So sometimes we've spent so much time in school ourselves that we think we have a certain level of expertise. What we're talking about here is educational biographies. And you can't help it. Teachers come with them too. Students come with them. This is how it was in the elementary school. This is how it was in the middle school. And all of that is difficult for the discussion. And again, the whole point of this video is to emphasize we need to have a discussion. So let's appreciate that we all have educational biographies. And we all think we know, by association and familiarity, how it should look. So here's another value question. What does a well-educated person look like? And I want you to think about someone in your life who you considered well-educated. A large proportion of staff at our school are in the middle of or have already achieved their master's in education. Does that mean well-educated? How about a doctor who goes to school for like 30 years but can't spell at all and has a lot of problem with simple math? Is that well-educated? If you think of someone well-educated, there's a good chance, if you're honest, that they may not have gone to post-secondary school at all. A lot of educated people would say they sat through some totally irrelevant lessons that they instantly forgot. On top of that, well-educated changes with time. 100 years ago, to be well-educated would be very different than it is now. Test scores show that people can take tests. If they do well on a test score, it shows that they can actually do well on a test. When it comes to parachute packing, and one kid does really well on the test, but sucks at the practical side, and then the one kid does horrible on tests, but can really pack a really awesome parachute. Which one are you going to trust? See, tests aren't the most reliable, numbers aren't the most reliable way of assessing what's going on in the classroom. Yeah, don't get me started on that. In fact, a high score on a standardized test really only correlates with a very shallow understanding of learning. Not all talented thinkers perform well on tests. You're a well-educated person if you can entertain people with quotes that you've memorized at a dinner party, or if you do really well on Jeopardy or Trivial Pursuit. Is that a well-educated person? And if I have to look something up because I don't know, that means I'm not an educated person. So isn't well-educated less to do with sitting in a chair and how long you've sat there and how well you sat there, and maybe more to do with your attitude towards learning? The first year of PBL is going to be hard. It's going to be hard for grade 8s going into grade 9 as it is, but then on top of that, this whole new way of learning, we actually expect kids to be confused. We expect kids to be uncertain. We expect kids to fail frequently, because that means there's learning. So it would be good to read the FAQ page. It would be good to come in and chat. It would be good to research PBL and become more familiar with our instruction model before the first report card. Have a good sense of what's going on before November, because that's how your kid's truly going to feel supported. John Dewey, I'm going to read you a quote, is one of those educational giants of the time, and he suggests that an educated person is one who has the power of reflective attention, to hold problems and questions before the mind. Without this power, we remain at the mercy of custom and external suggestion. So there's that idea of thinking on your own, independent thinking. And I would say that a well-educated person is probably less about what they do and more about who they are, their attitude towards learning, right? And here's another quote. Biesta says, "The goal of education is more education." So with education comes increased autonomy and independent thinking and curiosity. And somebody who's curious, you'll usually find they're also well educated, because they just keep on wanting to know. Matt Falk was a comedian in the community and a previous student of mine. And at our grad in 2020, Matt Falk got up and said a few words to our grads. I just want to point out some of the things that he said, because we're talking about values. What do you want to do? And that's a legit question. But then the more important question is, who do you want to be? And so this is what he said. Millions of people before you have made small compromises in their character in order to gain something for themselves. But those compromises add up. They take a toll on you. They create the reality we see around us. If you notice something wrong in the world, know that you're probably living in the consequence of someone else's compromise. So, good education, a good learner, these are all things that we really want to talk to you about. We want you to come in. We're inviting you wholeheartedly to come in and talk with us. Email, get on the social media, figure out what the heck your kids are doing, and be a part of it. We actually need parent volunteers. We need experts to come in and listen and give some feedback. And the more involved you are, I think the happier you'll find how well prepared your kids are going to be. So here's looking forward to an ongoing conversation. Thanks a lot.